Practically no one traveled to Strasbourg for this specific event. There were no television crews preparing their gear ahead of schedule, and none of the sports commentators had highlighted this fixture on their tournament schedules. However, I can assure you that this opening round contest between a pair of athletes who have never shared a tennis court could easily turn out to be the most critical 90 minutes of their respective professional journeys. By the time the final point is played, you will see exactly why this moment matters so much. There is a distinct, undeniable tension that fills the stadium when two competitors face off for the very first time. They have no past video footage to analyze over and no detailed scouting reports highlighting predictable baseline tendencies. Instead, you see two women stepping out onto the red clay of Strasbourg, carrying completely different backgrounds and life struggles within their rackets. They arrive with unique personal hardships, distinct past triumphs, and entirely different motivations pushing them to fight for every single game. A match between Ayala and Alexandra Olikova isn't the sort of headline event that goes viral on social media platforms, nor will it receive the intense, non-stop media coverage that follows a marquee matchup featuring Elena Rybakina. Yet, if you truly appreciate the underlying drama of this tournament bracket, what both of these competitors are dealing with as they enter Strasbourg, and where they hope to be over the next fortnight, you begin to see that this initial round is actually one of the most compelling matchups of the entire clay court swing. For Ayala in particular, this contest could show us far more about her growth as a player than any honorable defeat to a top-5 opponent ever could. Let's take a look at where Ayala currently finds herself, because her situation is much more nuanced than a simple glance at the world rankings would suggest. Sitting at number 42 in the world doesn't automatically grab headlines these days. But if you take a moment to look back at her position just 14 months ago, she was outside the top 130, grinding through lower-level ITF events and trying to prove to a doubting tennis community that she wasn't just a former junior star who had already peaked too early. Everything transformed during the Miami Open in March 2025. As you might recall, she entered the main draw as a wild card and proceeded to defeat Angelina Kalinina, then Yelena Ostapenko, before securing a stunning victory over Madison Keys. She then faced Iga Swiatek on center court and completely outplayed the 5-time Grand Slam champion, winning 6-2, 7-5. It was the exact same Swiatek who had been a special guest at Ayala's graduation ceremony at the Rafa Nadal Academy just 2 years prior. The narrative felt straight out of a movie script, the developing student outshining the guest of honor on one of the grandest stages the sport has to offer. That spectacular run in Miami didn't simply elevate her standing, it completely transformed her career trajectory. Securing nearly 390 points pushed her comfortably into the top 75, forcing the entire WTA Tour to pay serious attention to a 20-year-old from the Philippines who had developed a dangerous, powerful forehand weapon. She backed up that success later that year in September by capturing the Guadalajara 125 Open title, coming back from a tough 1-6 opening set against Arantxa Rus in the final match to secure the victory and become the first Filipina player ever to win a WTA-level tournament trophy. By the time March 2026 arrived, she had managed to climb to her highest career position at world number 29. Even Rafa Nadal took to social media to offer his personal congratulations. Back home in Manila, ordinary citizens who barely understood the difference between a tie-break and a tea-break were suddenly celebrating her name. However, official rankings only provide a polished summary of a player's journey. They fail to show the underlying struggles. Since reaching that peak of 29, Ayala has experienced a dip, falling back down to number 42. She suffered a disappointing opening round loss in Stuttgart against Leylah Fernandez, falling 6-1, 6-4 in a performance that felt flat and disconnected, leaving her coaching staff searching for answers that weren't obvious in the post-match statistics. Moving on to Madrid, she managed a win against Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova before running into Elise Mertens, who completely dominated her in an opening set bagel. The clay swing she had intentionally focused on for her professional development wasn't providing the smooth, positive outcomes that her hard-court successes had seemed to promise. But then she arrived in Rome, and her game clicked into place. The Italian Open was meant to be a true test for Ayala on clay, and she answered the challenge with real confidence. In her opening match, She completely overwhelmed Magdalena Frech, taking a flawless 6-0 lead in the first set. That brand of tennis, dominant, precise, and completely focused, reveals a competitor playing at a premium level. Frech adjusted her strategy and took the second set, but Ayala stayed calm to secure the final set 6-4, displaying a level of poise that she sometimes lacked when matches grew complicated. In the following round, she defeated Wang Xinyu 6-4, 6-3, which earned her a third-round meeting against world number 2 Elena Rybakina, the current Australian Open titleholder. While the final score of 6-4, 6-3 makes the defeat seem standard on paper, the actual match was incredibly competitive. Ayala pushed hard in virtually every single game, and the structural differences between the two players were incredibly small. Rybakina herself conceded in her post-match comments that it was a tough challenge, and Ayala departed the Foro Italico with a quiet sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her previous losses on clay. She noted afterward that she could genuinely see her progress on clay courts, especially when contrasting it with her performance at the same tournament the previous year. 12 months prior in Rome, she went out in the first round, but this time she secured 2 victories and pushed the second-best player in the world to her limits. Her development is clearly moving in the right direction, and that structural progress brings us directly to Strasbourg and her matchup against Olikova. This is where the tactical analysis becomes incredibly interesting, because Alexandra Olikova is entirely different from any competitor Ayala has ever gone up against. It isn't a matter of rank, as she sits at a respectable number 68 in the world. Instead, it is the unique way she builds a tennis point, the way she commands her side of the net, and the deep emotional resilience she brings into every single contest that makes Olikova a completely unique figure on the tour. Born in Ukraine, she and her family had to escape to Croatia when she was just a young girl after her father's political work turned them into targets. She spent her childhood as a refugee, practicing tennis in borrowed footwear and fighting her way through the lower tiers of the professional circuit while sleeping inside camper vans and busy airport lounges. Through it all, she has consistently represented Ukraine on the international circuit. Her father is currently serving on the front lines with the Ukrainian military, working inside one of the armed forces' most critical drone units. She still conducts her primary training in Kiev, and during her preparation for this year's Australian Open, an explosive Shahid drone detonated right across the street from her living space, rattling the walls of her home while she was resting. Take a second to really think about that situation because it directly impacts the specific way Olikova competes on the court. She openly describes her tactical approach as anti-tennis. For a long time, professional coaches insisted that her groundstroke technique was completely wrong, predicting she would never break into the top 1,000, let alone the top 100. She completely disregarded their advice. Her entire strategy is centered on creating chaos for her opponent, utilizing heavy backhand slices and high moonballs that hang in the air just long enough to make baseline players question their own decision-making. She relies on sudden variations in speed that shatter an opponent's natural rhythm like a record skipping in the middle of a track. Rather than trying to blast you off the court with pure power, she focuses entirely on making you feel deeply and constantly uncomfortable. For a significant number of players on the tour, that persistent awkwardness quickly transforms into deep irritation, and irritation inevitably leads to unforced errors. Back in January at the Australian Open, Olikova made her first appearance in a Grand Slam main draw on Rod Laver Arena, facing off against Madison Keys. She actually established an early advantage before her lack of experience at that level cost her the match. She offered a highly candid assessment of the performance afterward, noting that with a bit more experience, she wasn't certain she would have secured the win, but she was confident she would have managed the opportunities much better. That level of self-awareness makes her a very dangerous opponent, showing that she is learning rapidly in real time, processing high-level lessons, and putting them into practice immediately. Her recent qualifying performances right here in Strasbourg tell the exact same story. She completely overwhelmed Ksenia Efremova 6-1, 6-2 in her opening qualifying match, a total blowout, and then maintained complete control in her final qualifying round against Julia Grabher, winning 6-4, 6-4. Grabher is a very smart, seasoned competitor who understands the nuances of clay court tennis completely, yet Olikova didn't just scrape by. She dictated the terms of the match. That isn't the mark of an athlete struggling to find her form. That is a competitor arriving at a peak moment. Now, this presents the specific tactical puzzle that Ayala must figure out. Her strongest assets on the court are her excellent variety of shots and her natural desire to play aggressively. She possesses a heavy forehand, covers the court with excellent lateral movement, and when she is completely focused, she excels at taking the ball early to change its direction with a level of accuracy that creates real problems for even top 10 opponents. Her service game has also shown significant development. The serving metrics she produced during her opening clay match of 2026 at the Lida Open drew considerable praise from analysts. Working under the guidance of Joan Bosch at the Rafa Nadal Academy, the distinct Nadal approach is very visible in her patience to stay in long rallies and how she structures points using deep placement before launching an attack. However, Olikova's entire tactical framework is intentionally crafted to counter those specific attributes. Whenever Ayala attempts to set up her trademark forehand, Olikova counters with a slow, high-arching slice that completely eliminates any pace from the rally, forcing Ayala to generate all of her own ball speed from a standstill. When Ayala seeks to strike the ball early on the rise, Olikova's constantly shifting court angles and heavy spins disrupt her hitting zone entirely. It is the tennis equivalent of facing a tricky southpaw boxer, unorthodox in execution and incredibly frustrating to prepare for because it completely ignores the standard baseline patterns you spend hours drilling during practice sessions. Ayala's 4-3 record on clay this year reflects a competitor who is still trying to fine-tune her game on the surface. She is fully capable of beating high-quality opponents, as her run in Rome clearly demonstrated. 16, however, her performance can also drop off completely when she loses her rhythm, which was evident during her time in Stuttgart. The fundamental question heading into this match isn't whether Ayala possesses the superior technical game, as she almost certainly does. The real test is whether she can successfully dictate her style against a competitor whose entire game plan revolves around stopping her opponent from playing comfortable tennis. There is also a major psychological element here that is well worth evaluating. Ayala has spoken candidly about the unique expectations she manages as a major sports figure back in the Philippines. Every single match she plays is analyzed by the local media, and every minor shift in her world ranking triggers a massive national debate. She has confessed to finding it difficult to cope with the sudden wave of celebrity that arrived after her Miami breakthrough, telling an interviewer that she was initially in a bit of denial regarding how much her daily life had changed. That type of external pressure doesn't simply disappear just because you acknowledge it is there. It sits quietly on your shoulders during crucial service games and tightens your muscles on break points. Contrast that with an opponent like Olikova, who competes with a sense of complete freedom and has openly stated that she feels liberated on the court now, choosing to focus on the joy of playing rather than obsessing over final results. That stark mental difference could easily end up becoming the deciding factor in the match. Olikova's drive comes from a very deep place, which helps protect her from standard match anxiety. After nearly quitting the sport entirely following a disappointing loss in the Wimbledon qualifiers last year, it was the message from the soldiers in her father's military unit that brought her back. They sent her text messages telling her to keep going, explaining that they all wanted to see her break into the top 100 and asking her to remind the world of their struggle. She returned to the circuit playing with a complete lack of fear that propelled her from outside the top 200 to the very cusp of the top 50 in less than 12 months. When your standard of comparison includes dodging missile strikes on your home, a first-round match in Strasbourg simply doesn't carry the same overwhelming stress. However, we must be careful here, because viewing this purely as a one-sided psychological advantage does a real disservice to Ayala's capabilities. One of the most overlooked improvements in her game has been her developing capacity to adjust her tactics mid-match. Back in Rome, when Freck launched a fierce comeback to claim the second set following that opening 6-0 score, a younger version of Ayala might have completely fallen apart. Instead, she settled her nerves and figured out a way to claim the deciding set. Against Rybakina, she refused to back down against one of the biggest serves in the game, fighting hard in every single return game and forcing the world number 2 to earn every single point. That isn't the behavior of a competitor who folds under pressure. It shows a player learning season by season how to manage difficult moments and still perform at a premium level. Looking at strategy, Ayala's most direct route to victory lies in controlling the pace of the match. She needs to utilize her serve, which has transformed into a highly effective weapon on clay, to secure comfortable holds and alleviate the pressure on her return games. When dealing with Olikova's highly unusual ball deliveries, Ayala needs to make a conscious effort to position herself inside the baseline whenever the opportunity arises, cutting off the wide angles the Ukrainian relies on to reset the point. The most damaging error she could make would be to let extended baseline rallies develop on Olikova's terms, because that is precisely where her opponent wants the match to go. She wants to pull you into 20-shot exchanges, hoping you grow impatient on the 15th ball and hand over the point. Ayala's own court variety, her delicate drop shots, her slices, and her quick alterations in ball direction could serve as the perfect counter-strategy, but only if she executes them with complete confidence right from the opening game. We also need to evaluate her opponent's history on this specific surface. Olikova's winning percentage on clay at the WTA level stands at just 42.9%, which might not seem particularly threatening at first glance, but analyzing the context alters that perspective completely. The vast majority of her clay court matches have occurred at the challenger and ITF levels, where her performance metrics are incredibly dominant. She boasts 254 victories against just 115 defeats over her career, and a spectacular 46-15 record within the last year alone. She captured 6 individual tournament titles in 2025, primarily on clay courts, which included 3 separate WTA 125 trophies. The clear disparity between her top-level WTA clay record and her absolute dominance at the lower tiers points to a competitor who is still figuring out how to transition her unique style to the absolute highest level of the sport, rather than someone who struggles on the surface itself. Furthermore, those convincing qualifying victories this week against Efremova and Grabher, both executed on clay, show that she is dialing in her game at the perfect moment. For Ayala, this tournament is also explicitly about preparing herself for Roland Garros. Strasbourg serves as her absolute final competitive stop before heading to the French Open, where she will be making her second appearance in the main draw. Her debut appearance last year concluded with a disappointing first-round exit. She has spoken openly about her desire to put together a much deeper run this time around, focusing on building the type of comfort with clay courts that her years of training at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca should have established long ago. She recently noted that competing at the professional level is a completely different challenge, acknowledging that this is her very first full season navigating these elite tournaments on clay. That level of honesty is incredibly refreshing and telling. She isn't trying to claim that clay court tennis comes naturally to her. She recognizes that she is still right in the thick of a steep learning curve and understands that every single match on the surface is an investment in her long-term future. 24. Can Ayala keep her game together against Olikova? That is the core question we raised at the start, and the most candid answer is that it completely depends on which version of Ayala steps out onto the court. The version we saw in Rome, aggressive, poised, and highly disciplined with her tactics, should handle this challenge with relative ease. However, the version that showed up in Stuttgart, passive, lacking rhythm, and unable to dictate points, could find herself facing a very difficult day against a competitor who thrives on making opponents look exactly like that. The actual distance between those two versions of her game is much smaller than most fans realize. It really comes down to executing first-strike tennis. It hinges on how quickly Ayala can decode Olikova's unusual baseline patterns and simply refuse to get dragged into the grueling physical battles the Ukrainian wants to create. Ultimately, it depends on whether Ayala can approach this match not as a fixture she is automatically expected to win, but as a complex problem she must actively solve on the court. What makes this particular matchup so incredibly fascinating isn't the world rankings, raw athleticism, or career projections. By all of those standard metrics, Ayala enters the court as the heavy favorite to win. The real appeal lies in the direct collision of two completely unique life journeys and radically different playing styles that neither competitor can fully prepare for in a practice session. You have the academy-trained player from the Philippines who developed her game on the pristine courts of Mallorca, guided by coaches who trained directly under Tony Nadal, now striving to maximize her potential on the very surface her mentor made legendary. On the other side, you have Olikova, the former refugee-turned-activist and anti-tennis disruptor who balances her training sessions around active air raid sirens and competes for an audience of frontline soldiers. They have never stood on opposite sides of the net before, and they have never even crossed paths in a tournament draw. When they finally step out onto the clay courts of Strasbourg, both women will be confronting the exact same question that defines professional sports at its most human level. How much of everything I have endured, studied, and constructed can I successfully execute over the next 2 hours? Ayala's progress on clay is a proven fact. It is easily measurable and validated by strong performances against top-tier talent. However, maintaining peak form is an active challenge. It doesn't simply carry over on its own just because you played well the week before. It demands deliberate, point-by-point decision-making and a constant readiness to adjust your strategy when an opponent refuses to play along with your preferred game plan. And make no mistake, Olikova will absolutely not cooperate. That refusal to conform is her entire identity as a professional athlete. She will use her slice, rely on high loops, vary her pace, and consistently break up the rhythm of the match. She will execute this strategy with the absolute calm of an individual who knows that a tennis match is nowhere near the most difficult challenge she faces in her life. If Ayala accepts the awkward nature of the match early on, choosing to adapt to the strange rhythm rather than fighting against it, she possesses all the necessary athletic tools to move out of the first round. Her forehand carries far more power, her baseline movement is significantly sharper, and her serve is capable of generating free points that Olikova simply cannot match. However, she must actively and relentlessly earn those structural advantages 1 point at a time. She cannot simply wait around for them to appear on their own. That is the true measure of a player's form, not whether you can look brilliant against opponents who play directly into your favorite patterns, but whether you can maintain your composure when someone is intentionally and systematically trying to disrupt your entire game. This is precisely what a challenging clay court swing is supposed to feel like: unfamiliar, messy, and filled with matches that appear completely straightforward on a tournament sheet until the very first ball hits the red dirt and everything becomes incredibly complicated. Ayala departed the courts in Rome stating that she could genuinely see her own development on the surface. Strasbourg provides the perfect stage for her to prove that this development isn't fragile, showing that it can withstand not just raw baseline power, but pure, intentional chaos. Alexandra Olikova, with her heavy slices, her distinct tattoos, and her fierce sense of personal mission, represents pure chaos in tennis whites. The tournament bracket has presented us with a truly compelling match, and now we get to watch how these two competitors handle the challenge.